As Armenia heads into elections, law enforcement appears to be moving with force against opposition critics while ignoring state-linked pressure, threats, and alleged abuse of administrative power. This also includes troubling new developments of using 25-day military training summons to dissuade and discourage Armenian citizens from coming to Armenia to vote. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Groong's Spotlight on Silence episode. The Armenian Center for Political Rights, Քաղաքական իրավունքների հայկական կենտրոն, has released a number of important reports recently. The links of these reports are going to be in the show notes, so please check them out. Rafael Ishkhanyan, co-founder of the ACPR and a lawyer specializing in human rights, joins us. He coordinates the monitoring of peaceful assemblies at the Helsinki Committee of Armenia and is a member of the ODIHR panel of experts on freedom of assembly and association. Welcome back to the Groong podcast, Rafael.
Hello, dear Aspet. Hello, Vic. Nice to be there.
Ողջույն, Rafael. Let's begin with the strange competence of Armenia's law enforcement system. It seems to be able to find, record, and leak opposition-linked conversations with lightning speed and precision. But when reports point to possible government-side abuse, patronage, or even pressure, the same system looks slow, quiet, careful, or even completely non-existent. The double standard is now part of the election environment. What does it say about state institutions when wiretapped opposition conversations become campaign material, as it appears to be in this election?
First of all, I think we have to look back how we came to this point, because all these 8 years, the change of power, and we were talking about the consolidation of all the leverage within the hands of a single executive office, including, of course, the traditional ones which should be under that is the police, the National Security Service, the other bodies, law enforcement that's supposed to be independent. And in that case, the prosecutor's office, the investigative committee, anti-corruption, and each and kind of committee or law enforcement unit you can think of, and all the chiefs and heads and deputies basically appointed by what would happen in a country with a single party system. The one thing to keep in mind is when people are looking on Armenia and imagining at a democratic country in an ocean of this barbaric political habits, one should keep in mind that throughout the decades, and including now at the same time, the legislative body has been ruled by one party. This is the opposition never had any chance of vetoing of anything. That means while appointing the said chiefs of the important law enforcement bodies, the one party does not have to consult with anyone. And it is, of course, not just a party. Inside the party, there is absolutely no discern or disagreement about anything when it comes to whatever the head of the party, that is the prime minister, thinks. So having this party system, which in a normal parliamentary country should have been that, the executive is answering before the parliament, we have the opposite situation. So just keeping this in mind, because the past years we've seen dismissal and appointment of very important positions in the law enforcement, judiciary, which would basically be the guarantee of the non-abuse, etc., and all of them stemming from the decisions of one single party and basically one single person. Now we're coming to the pre-electoral time. Of course, in pre-election campaign, when you open the website of the Anti-Corruption Committee, there's absolutely nothing but wiretaps of some opposition-linked figures or alleged opposition figures or actual opposition figures in some cases, talking different, very slang and street talk, which many times, of course, involves plausible or, let's say, instances of bribery. However, at the same time, there were very, the same plausibility, at least attributed to some actions of the ruling party. For instance, I recalled statement by the Transparency International when they announced, when they put in the statement that the chief of the Bagratashyan customs point collected all the municipal leaders of Tavush and Lori regions and basically put them some task to somehow guarantee the victory of the civil contract party. In exchange, of course, promising them something in return. There would be some career steps or whatever. From the legal perspective, this is absolutely the same as cash bribe, let's say. If you are trading, giving promises of raising the office of certain person, this is the same as giving a cash. It goes under the same article. It is the same crime. After this statement by a quite reputable organization, it would be logical to see at least initiation of a criminal process. But to my knowledge, there was none. And there was absolutely no wiretapping whatsoever about that. So again, there are some plausible instances that we can rule out that bribery happened. Okay, if you hear these wiretaps, huge part of the recordings has nothing to do with what's important for the criminal case.
Also given we've seen in previous cases when the wiretaps have been at least selectively edited, right, to make it look worse, important context has been removed. How can we be certain that these wiretaps are actually accurate in this case? So that's, I think, my point. And what happened to the presumption of innocence and confidentiality of evidence?
You're right. So yeah, first we had this experience with the criminal case of Bagrat Archbishop and his team. That they basically put they put a part of a conversation which had nothing to do with the planned protest that they had, and of course edited the way that people would perceive that they were planning something violent. In the end, it turned out it was just a friendly discussion about the capital punishment in general that has nothing to do with the protests. It's the same, of course, here. We can be sure in many instances, and when it comes to very specific people, for instance, the famous Artsakh commander and reconnaissance commander Artura Avanes, I think.
Gandas, yeah.
Gandas, more known by his nickname, of course. If you hear the part of his wiretap, there's just one single episode when he, allegedly talking to one of his friends, says, of course, you will have a place in the future military, something like that. Yeah. After that and before that, it's just a talk about some political ideas, how they perceive it. And what happened, what comes out from this is there was a deliberate decision to put the whole conversation, and of course, with the title that this person violated criminal law, of course, without any concern about the privacy, or in this case, presumption of innocence. You don't know what happened in reality. If you are putting all the names, of course, with abbreviations, but it is absolutely understandable to anyone. If you see AO has been wiretapped, and then you see the person with the same initials being arrested at the same time. So this becomes something, of course,
exactly.
Cosmetic.
So more about the Akanates observer mission, which is funded by Transparency International. I think this is the Bagrat Ashen customs incident. According to the report, there were meetings allegedly held both in the official premises and private venues, with participants being promised favorable treatment. Is there how credible is their proof? I haven't reviewed it. Can you tell me more about this? And has there been any investigation about this?
Well, I'm not aware of any investigation. As far as I tried to search on the web, I didn't find any evidence that there is a criminal case ongoing on this statement, based on this statement. About the credibility, so it is very detailed. It is described in a lot of details, and I think Transparency International is not an organization that would just put words forward without having actual proof behind that. And I don't know if they actually gave factual evidence to the law enforcement or not, or maybe their source because of fears or any other reason, prefer to stay anonymous. But the details that are described here, they're of very actual people that can be checked. So these attributions can be verified or otherwise, denied if there is a criminal investigation. And it should have been the case, because if there is this kind of, this plausible information about the crime. So for the general public, of course, they want to know what happened in the end. Is it, if that's not true, so we have to know how to treat the statements from this organization, because it matters. If it's true, then we have to see the criminal behind the bars. And if the authorities are keeping silent, this leads to the second situation. That is, there's something happened there. Otherwise, they would deny it very easily.
Yeah. Now, this may be a rhetorical question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is this an election campaign, or is this some kind of an administrative machine mobilized for political survival? Can you find any semblance of fairness, balance in how the government is approaching this?
But I think, Armenian elections are very often actually a struggle for survival. For one that during these 30 plus years of independence, we never witnessed change of power through elections. It never happened yet. Whenever, for some reason, it was a coup or it was a popular protests, someone came to power and then just cemented their power, legitimized that power through elections, and then kept it as far as there would be some transfer or there would be another protest whatsoever. So this is one thing. Second, as I mentioned, this is basically de facto one-party system. All the leverage belongs to this one center of gravity, one center of political gravity. If someone wants to compete in these elections, want to contest, it would be the same as as a featherweight boxer would step into a boxing ring with a heavyweight one. Of course, if you somehow manage to defeat the opponent, probably you'll be victorious. But how is that possible even? So the starting positions are not even equal. The other side already has huge basis of electorate. They have all the leverages how to manipulate the situation. And if you add on top that the traditional criticism, which was somehow keeping the power restrained during the past, now is virtually non-existent. The things that happened the recent weeks, the persecutions, the rhetoric, and this new punishments of sending people to the army because they might vote for the opponent, this is something unheard. This was something unheard for decades, let's say.
Yeah, making service in the army a punishment is kind of an interesting thing. Rafael, the ACPR's June 3rd report on hate speech examines Arthur Osipyan's case, which is a recent thing that went viral, actually. The report argues that the investigative committee treated this public questioning of Pashinyan as obstruction of an election campaign. But the report says that the video shows that Pashinyan agreed to answer Osipyan's questions and that the exchange ended only when Pashinyan's guards and supporters removed him. We have some concerns here. Are investigative bodies informing the public, informing investigations, or are they helping frame critics as criminals during the campaign?
When it comes to certain situations, of course, they're doing the second. They're just trying to find whichever, legal let's say, article or argument would fit. And sometimes when they mismatch, they change it. For instance, before Osipyan's case, there was another case, Artsakh Armenians, I think, a blogger, not very well known in a political arena, but however, he did some quite harsh remarks about Pashinyan, calling him to Shengavit, to have some, this manly conversation. It was, so they actually detained him, they arrested him and detained him based on another hate speech law, spreading intolerance and inciting hatred or intolerance based on some protective characteristics. Later, when it was I don't know, maybe they understood that it was just absurd. They changed it to hooliganism. Sometimes this one can be stretched, or they cannot be, but they stretch it as much as you can basically label anything with that. because the term hooliganism now just doesn't make any sense. They basically decriminalized insults, defamation, and the same things now are used as hooliganism.
Right.
When it comes to Arturo Ciprian, of course, he is actually presented with 3 charges at the same time. So one, as you mentioned, obstruction of political campaign, which doesn't make any sense. He asked politely, "Can I ask you questions?" To which Pashinyan said, "Of course, dear." And then they started. He was all the time, the initiative was on Pashinyan. If he wanted, he could have left. If he wanted, he could have, what eventually he did.
That's
for
right.
his supporters and bodyguards.
Nobody was detaining nobody.
It just doesn't make sense. So we didn't even, we didn't even go very deep into that analyzing because there's nothing to analyze. The second one is hooliganism. So again, this is the most stretched and most legally uncertain thing that ever exists in the Armenian legal framework. And it's used very inconsistently. And because of that, bloggers, journalists have been jailed, and many critics have been charged, while at the same time, the same actions have been done from the supporters or from the public officials themselves. Of course, they're not on that cases. Well, when it comes to the main one, and this is actually happened the way that we were already working on the report on the systemic issue of the application of hate speech laws when Arturo Ciprian was arrested and charged with that. And as I understand, the main charge is that the other 2 are supplementary, just to make the, to make it seem like that there's, he's a very dangerous criminal charged with 3 counts or whatsoever. What he did basically was charged for Facebook posts when he criticized Pashinyan, and there were some, let's say, rhetorical threats to him, which is a very common thing nowadays in Armenian politics and in the political discourse. So they labeled it as a hate speech. So there's this thing what we were working on before, and Osipia's case just cemented this systemic issue. The hate speech is protecting vulnerable groups. That's the idea of hate speech. You cannot hate someone personally and say that it's a hate speech. It is not. It's just a personal animosity. If you hate someone because of their color, because of their religion, because of their minority status, that is something that makes them vulnerable, at the same time, something that is important part of their identity, then there is hate speech. In Armenia, the only characteristic that's been, say, in 99% cases, because there are very few exceptions, very few, is so-called political views. Basically, hate speech discriminating against political views of someone. You would imagine something that would happen, let's say, in USSR against dissidents. Yes, there would be counter-revolutionaries which would be persecuted. Maybe that would be the case. But under the notion of political views, the law enforcement understands Pashinyan's actions. Whatever he does, and whatever you don't like that he does, they consider that it's a hate speech because you are discriminating against Nikol Pashinyan because of his political views. The absurdity cannot put in, but that's why we needed 20+ pages to try to, openly detail it down. Currently, Osipian, and if there's any other person that is behind bars because of this, they are all, of course, are politically motivated political prisoners. For one, the Cassation Court made a precedent which cemented this approach. That is currently this unlawful interpretation of hate speech laws is a systemic issue. If there's another case that goes to court, the court has to follow this logic, because Cassation Court said, yes, the political activity of a politician, if your hate is based on that you don't like what they do, that is hate speech. It doesn't make sense.
Rafael, we thought that the Pashinyan language was extreme and constituted hate speech against Armenians. He invented terms like pseudo-elites of Karabakh, runaways, people who ran away while Armenian soldiers died and such. All of this coming together, would you define the Karabakh people, the Artsakhes in Armenia, as a vulnerable group?
And also,
Absolutely.
if I can just add, this is not an isolated incident, right? Throughout this campaign, multiple civil contract officials during debates and other public speeches have used that language.
It's absolutely. So they are vulnerable group. They are targeted a lot. And just to into one of the cases. If you remember the anonymous video when I don't know how many people with masks, with guns, were threatening Pashinyan to kill him or something. I don't know.
Allegedly, and
yeah.
Because
let's say, okay, there were actually people who really wanted to kill Prime Minister. Okay, this is a crime, yeah, and they have to be persecuted. When during the campaign, when Pashinyan was talking about this video, when he was referring to this video, he was not saying all the time, the masked men with guns. He was not saying these terrorists, this unknown terrorists, or these Asala terrorists, because they had the Asala sign on them. He never even mentioned the word Asala once. All the time he was saying people talking Karabakh accent. It seems like this was the only characteristic that he took from this video. Let's imagine if those terrorists, let's call them terrorists, if they actually exist, they are terrorists. If they would speak Gyumri dialect, what do you think? Would Pashinyan say those Gyumri dialect speaking? Oh no, he was not saying that. He was saying accent, which is not actually, but still, yeah. This also this is also derogatory. He say the Gyumri accent speaking guys, the Gyumri accent speaking? No, of course not. And when someone would say, let's say a critic of what I'm saying now would say, well, they are always referring to the elites, that is to the ones that were responsible for bad things. They're not referring to ordinary Karabakh citizens. Well, anyone can just spend 5-10 minutes on Google and find the most famous racist people. When they're talking about migrants, let's say, yeah, they're not saying all. They're also saying the ones that are taking our jobs, or the ones that are stabbing our children. You see what I'm getting into. This so-called disclaimer is just as a disclaimer is just, note, this speech doesn't refer to everyone with this, but everyone perceives it this way. There were cases recently in school or kindergarten, I'm not sure, that an Artsakh kid was treated very badly and being called a Turk or Azeri or something. And the instances like this happen latently a lot. Many people don't want to talk about that openly without disclosing their anonymity. But this is something that happens. It is something that is being fueled. If your political elite, and they are current political elite, however, whatever we think about that, they talk, is of course going to be spread. This is one thing that when the court that I mentioned about this hate speech laws, about the precedent, when they were referring to Council of Europe recommendation about hate speech, part of this recommendation says the countering it mostly should be done through education, through culture, through disseminating tolerance, and first of all, from the public offices, from those that have power in the country. But now we are seeing the complete opposite. They are the ones that are spreading internal hatred on people of the same nationality based on a different origin, let's say from Artsakh, because of their dialect, because of some perceived historical events.
Yeah, we were talking with Arega Hovsepian, and she said that most Artsakhis haven't even been able to convert their passports to vote. So there are about 20,000-30,000 Artsaksis. Just for our listeners who may not be familiar with the situation, what is the political value? I mean, it seems abhorrent to think about it because it's hate speech. What is the political value of stigmatizing this population of Armenians from Artsakh? Is it perhaps to discourage them from voting? I'm not sure. What do you think? Or is it to encourage the other segment of the population to vote based on hate?
Both, but probably initially to make them abstain from voting or make it for them impossible to vote, because the obtaining of citizenship, the procedure was going quite normal speed before some period ago, and then it started to slow down a lot. And then basically now the thousands are waiting, and there is just no logical explanation why it's being so delayed. Actually, this has been addressed by not only the local human rights defenders. The OSCE also addressed that in their the statement about the preliminary assessment. So this is actually a big one of the tools to keep them to deprive them of the voting right, at least during this election. However, you're right. The whole rhetoric also might mobilize other people based on hate, because we know that hate has a very great force of mobilization. But interestingly, just today, the government also announced a different program that they're going to, if I'm not mistaken, to part of debt of people from Karabakh, from Artsakh, that they had before, and they can pay for that. So this is, this is the same logic when once you are punching and then giving a candy with the other hand. So, and of course, the whole logic behind that is make the people abstain, those who would not vote for you for sure. And if there are some who are not decisive yet, first of all, scare them a bit as much as you can, because scared people are then easily manipulated. And then present with the candy. Now maybe some will abstain, and those who go there, now there may be some that will vote for you.
Yeah. I can see how someone in such a vulnerable state could say, okay, well, what is my vote going to count? At least I might get part of my debt forgiven. But it's sad nevertheless. Let's move to that same report from June 3rd, where you talk about, I believe, this issue. Articles 329, and maybe you already mentioned it, but I want to go in more detail. Articles 329 and 330 are the ones being used for this purpose. And you say that they have distorted interpretation and they're not being used for their original purpose. Can you tell us more about these articles? What are they? And how are they being distorted?
Sure. So they are very similar of what they are designed to serve for. So one of them, 329, criminalizes incitement to hatred in many ways. Just let's call it incitement to hatred. The second one criminalizes the public cause for violence. This is not the whole infraction. This is not the whole offense yet. Only incitement of hatred or cause for violence if that is motivated by hate or intolerance against certain protected characteristic. That is, if I make a public call for violence against certain person, individual, without any mentioning reasons, random person, like me, the same color, the same everything, let's say, okay, there's no hate inside it. I just don't like this person and want him to be, harmed. There's no public call for violence in the sense of this article. If I do that because of the skin color of that person, because of the religion, because of the sexual orientation, other minority status, now we can talk about the Article 330. Or if it's not a call for violence, it's an incitement to hatred based on the same characteristics. Now we have 329. So these two are what's called hate speech laws, criminalized hate speech laws. What's interesting is one of them already exists for 5 years. That is the public cause for violence. The other one was added with a new criminal code. It's 3 years, I think, already, 4. Well, I was reading the report by Pink Armenia, the organization which mostly is occupied with the rights of LGBT people. And they did monitoring and they found non-single criminal case that made it into the court. You imagine when you talk about the hate speech laws in some country and its application. Of course, first thing would come in mind is probably there would be a lot of cases against people motivated by the hate against those people because of sexual orientation.
And Armenia is not known to be the most liberal country in terms of sexual orientation, right? It's a very traditional country.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is hate speech. There's a lot of hate speech. They should be criminalized, actually, but there is not. But they never initialize, or if they initialize, they don't give it to the court whatsoever. So there's no one being sentenced based on these articles because of hate speech against LGBT people. Let's put it. What it's used for is protect the public officials, mostly and almost exclusively the ruling party officials. And Nikol Pashinyan occupies has the lion's share of all these criminal cases with these hate speech laws. And so how they have to do it, because it sounds absurd from initially, because it's hate speech. It has to be it should be protecting vulnerable groups, and there are many vulnerable groups in Armenia, of course, national minorities, Artsakh people from refugee status, LGBT people, and anyone. But they use it to protect the party officials and public office holders, starting from prime minister to the other ministers, that is the most I'd say the most privileged ones. And how they do it and how the distortion works is when there's the list of the characteristics. It says like color, religion, racial characteristics, whatsoever, religious, political, other views. And they say, oh yeah, there it is, political views. Okay, let's just let's interpret it in that way, that whatever the politician is doing, that is what their political views are.
So you are saying that they are treating political views as protected characteristic?
They are not only viewing that this way, they are interpreting political views as same thing as the political conduct or political activity.
Rafael, what are the protected categories or characteristics in Armenia? Here, for example, we have what is it, 5 or 6 categories in the United States, which would be age, sex, etc., color of skin, religion. But what are they in Armenia?
Pressure depends on the interpretation. Basically, Armenian legal framework, the constitution has a reference to the human rights documents that we signed. It's the Article 81, if someone is interested. And it says that basic human rights should be interpreted in the light of the practice of bodies, international bodies, operating on the basis of these human rights documents. That is, we have open-ended list. It says color, religion, origin, religious political views, and other personal or group characteristics. So if you look into the constitution, if you look into that, and if you look at the fact that the cassation court, which has the right to do the precedent, the start, they say, so what they did, they basically interpreted that in the light of the Council of Europe recommendation of 2022 about hate speech, combating hate speech. So we have to go there. Look what it says. It says, of course, the vulnerable characteristics should be protected in the first place. The minority status, sexual orientation, migrant status or similar status, etc., etc. So these should be considered the ones that is not listed there, but are included in the open list. Even if you go and try to interpret it legalistically, let's say, political views is not the same as the belonging to some party or having this kind of conduct. There is a separate criminal article if someone does threats, actual real threats against someone because of their political activity. This is a separate offense. It's a lighter. It's not a grave felony, let's say. The same article has another aggravating circumstance. When it becomes a hate crime, that is, if you do that based on both the activity of a politician and also their color, let's say, or their minority status, or their sex, their gender, and whatsoever. So these two should be different, but they are interpreting political activity as a protective characteristic, as political views, basically equalizing the prime minister's political activities are equalized to characteristics such as color of person, such as the religion of person, such as the origin, etc. You see what it takes.
Right. You in the report, I think you mentioned a case, Hakob Grigoryan's case, I believe. Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So this was the case that is currently the basis of this precedent. That now the court interpretations are should be referred to. So Mr. Grigoryan was a history teacher, and the history is that he was during, I think in 2022, in a history class with 7 grades, when he was asked about Artsakh war, he did several harsh remarks about Pashinyan, that they have to be executed basically in a public square, something similar. I don't want to repeat that, but basically, yes, quite harsh and quite, let's say, violent remarks about them. Someone recorded it and then put on Facebook, and it started to circulate. Was charged with public cause for violence. Public cause for violence in the 7th grade. Based on what? If you look into the formulation, said disagreeing with the political opinions of Nikol Pashinyan and his activities, motivated by his own political opinions, he made public calls for violence. We're supposed to criticize politicians if we don't talk about their activity. this is actually this is the thing that you can criticize, and this is why the politicians have higher threshold of criticism, of tolerable criticism. Basically, this is inverted now. This higher threshold is now lower threshold. You can maybe you can criticize very harshly a doctor because of their conduct, because medical activity is not yet considered as a protected characteristic. But if you say the same about a politician or a public office holder, that would be basically a hate crime. That would be qualified as such.
Grigoryan was acquitted, right? Is that the case? Is that the case? And what is exactly the precedent that it said? What was the reason for his acquittal?
Well, he was not acquitted. He was found guilty and paid fine. He was not imprisoned. Then Court of Appeal acquitted him. Then Court of Cassation reversed the ruling to the initial one, that is conviction. And this became the precedent. You can go to the website of Cassation Court. They proudly announced that now they have a case. And later on, the public course of violence, the case is based on that charges should be interpreted in this light. That is interpreted against human rights standards.
Yeah. So let's go from talking about hate speech that Pashinyan's critics are accused of to hate speech, actual hate speech being conducted by the government. You had an urgent statement on May 19 about this. And in your report, you talk about double standards. And your report basically says that Pashinyan threatened opposition figures during the campaign, including Robert Kocharian, Serge Sargsyan, Samuel Karapetyan, and Gagik Tsarukyan. He linked them to that the infamous video of the masked people threatening Pashinyan. He actually said that he would want to, I'm just quoting him. He said he would kill them. He would kill his political opponents. And your report also quotes Pashinyan saying that he would make them kneel, finish them off, etc., etc. So very stark contrast, right? Why are opposition activists detained for crude, maybe hyperbolic speech, but Pashinyan is able to make these threats without any consequence? I mean, I understand that it's a very authoritarian system. Are you getting any sympathy or any attention about this from international bodies? Has there been any appeals sent to international organizations for the behavior of Armenian leaders? And what is the practice and what is the result of that?
Well, at least ACPR, us, we sent all these statements to every relevant international body that has any mandate in human rights. I can't say about the response at the time. Maybe there's also some restraint about the elections, and there are some geopolitical concerns. I want to get into that a lot, but of course that's what I'm saying. Now the restraints are lower. Of course, what is allowed, let's say, to the current power to say, it was not allowed before. For one, Pashinyan's remarks, let's divide into two parts. One of the remarks against his political opponents, most of it, we have to apply the standard both sides. It is not hate speech too. When it is, because most of it is fueled by personal animosity of his political rivals, this is a personal, individually directed, let's say, hate. Let's say whatever. So this is not hate speech per se, and it should be qualified. This is what we are trying to, to get to a people. However, there's difference between what says the prime minister of a country with one party on power, with all the law enforcement doing whatever he says, and when he says any threats, if you can, and this is different when you compare it to a single activist that uses this kind of word, this kind of language. So these threats from prime minister, they can, and we have seen such examples last year when he threatened Samuel Karapetyan after his remarks about supporting the church with this insulting words and whatever. Just a few hours later, the law enforcement gathered around his house and he was arrested. So we've seen that his threats are becoming reality. It doesn't mean necessarily they're going to kill them somewhere and throw their bodies, but they're going to be, and there's very likely it's very plausible that illegal interference might happen because the prime minister said that. So this is what raises the risk when the threats are voiced by someone holding high public office. On the other hand, when we are talking about an individual activist, or let's take Osipyan, for example, because we had this case on our eyes. He's still in a hunger strike at the moment, more than 2 weeks, I think. He doesn't have any political or governmental leverage whatsoever. If he wanted to hurt prime minister, he had 10 full minutes to do that, standing in front of him. He didn't even want to make a handshake with him. That is trying to rule out any kind of physical conduct. You see when I get it. This guy is behind the jails in a hunger strike. The other one is running for the 3rd term. Yeah, and I think we covered hate speech part because when it comes to his remarks about Artsakh Armenians, at least in an example that I mentioned about this video, when he was always noting the accent that is the dialect, not the other, being armed or whatever, being a terrorist or from Assad or whatever. This is classical hate speech because it's based on a protected characteristic. It's motivated by a protected characteristic. It might not be qualified as a call for violence per se, but it is at least the Article 329 is tailored for specifically this kind of situations when someone spreads or incites hatred based on, in this case, on the origin of a person.
Rafael, we earlier mentioned the issue of using military service as a tool, but that was because there were rumors that Armenian authorities were exploiting military service or mandatory military training as a punishment. We were a little uneasy about that whole issue, but it does look like the grab bag of illicit tools and methods used by Pashinyan to discourage opposition voters appears to be expanding. Today, your ACPR released a statement, an urgent statement, saying that Armenian authorities are using military service as punishment. And your report cites government officials making threats to send Armenian citizens who came from Russia to 1 month or 2 month training military camps. The ACPR then points to a video showing military police checking passports at borders, crossings, and serving notices to male Armenian passport holders arriving from Russia. Are these 25-day training camps now being used as an election tool, essentially?
Yes. Just quick explanation, because the training camp, this phrase doesn't say anything. This is, in Armenian, it would be Varjakan Havak. We had a very tough time trying to translate it, that because even the Armenian one doesn't represent what it actually is. So what it is, it's a supplementary military service for the reservists.
You can
Same
get
as the ordinary one.
You can be sent to combat duty, or like you can be sent to go to.
Yes. This is mostly for combat duty. Well, I also had my 3 months before, 3 years ago. What it is, basically, you're supposed to send. Well, I don't want to get into the details, but it involves combat duty. It's written in the law, so there's no governmental secret whatsoever. It's a normal, ordinary military service. Well, on the paper. This is a topic of different discussion, what it's in reality, but that's not the case. So this is something that when, in Armenia, when there is a mandatory military service, people, males, when they turn 18 and they are okay, the health condition is, there are no problems. If they are not, studying in one of the universities that would provide for some period, they're supposed to go to military service. Yeah, it was 2 years. Now, before the elections, they made it 1.5.
Right.
However, this is equal for everyone. If you are a male and you are 18, put aside the health issues or education, you're supposed to go to the service. Okay, we got it. And from the human rights perspective, this is okay. This is normal because it's acknowledged, let's say, at least. You can look at Article 4 of the European Convention of Human Rights. It specifically discusses this issue, saying it should not be considered as a forced labor. However, the supplementary duty in Armenia, or what we call training camps, this is not obligatory for everyone. this can be decided. So this is the who should be participating there. The defense ministry would decide, and they have discretion, whom to call, whom to summon for these training camps things. Basically, again, the comparison: you turn 18, you are summoned. After you finish it, you are in the reserve, you can be summoned. So you see the difference. And the standards based on what you can be summoned, they're none. They don't exist. There's no standard. There's no rotation. There's no lottery. There's nothing. They can decide, let's say, to summon me 3 times in a row while not summoning my neighbor. And they might not summon my neighbor at all during his life.
So what's the appropriate safeguard? Is it a legal?
There's none.
Is it a?
There's none. There's absolutely no safeguard against that. The
How do you fix
safeguard
it?
would have been, well, we are trying to find, let's say, a volunteer to start a strategic litigation. I don't want to open brackets more, but because the law should be changed, to change the law, you need the parliament. The parliament MPs were the ones that were threatening the peaceful protesters with this, and later admitting that, yes, they sent the opposition protesters for combat duty and they're going to do that again. So we don't have this option to change the law. The other situation, the other way around, it should be to challenge it in local courts. Well, as we've seen in the case of hate speech laws, some others, now even the legal system, the judicial system doesn't, serve its purpose when it comes to very specific human rights violations. So maybe the only way at this situation would be to take the case to the European Court of Human Rights, challenge it on the basis of Article 4 and Article 14, that is prohibition of discrimination and forced labor, not prescribed by law, because it doesn't meet the quality of law principle. It's not sufficiently clear. It doesn't have standards of applicability that would rule out any discrimination. So with this tool in hand, they are doing it, and then I haven't seen any criticism about that from any international organization to this day, even though we covered whole issue in 24 in a comprehensive report about
they
that.
threatened the protesters and they sent the protesters to military service.
Yes,
and now,
they did. They admitted. They admitted on public TV that they did that.
And are they doing that? Is that now appearing to happen also for the elections? Can you tell us more about that? So
there's this thing. I don't want to go into this political aspect of that geopolitical aspect, because you know what it's this hybridology currently is the new science here. Basically, there are bigger countries. This is not my words. I have to refer. I'm not the author, but I like it a lot. So we have basically global powers that have their favorites in Armenia. Okay. And there might be some interference. Yeah, of course. It's always like that, sure. So now certain people are talking about 100,000 Armenians from Russia that are coming to Armenia in organized manner, taking bribes to vote for the opposition. Just put it aside if it's true or not, if there's any fact or not. At least one of such claims have been debunked. There are some that might be plausible. I mean, this is not something that you can rule out. It's logical, yeah, because if someone wants to bribe, if you do that in a different country, it's harder to track. But come on, in that case, how can we be sure if no one is being bribed in Turkey or in Europe or in US or in any other country?
So essentially, just to spell it out, for citizens arriving from Russia because of this hybrid threat, military police officers are going to the airport and greeting them and checking their papers. Is that correct?
Yes, and also applying illegal punishment
and summoning them to military service.
Yes.
So has it been proven? Like what is the evidence for that?
The evidence is the evidence is that they are admitting that they are doing that. I'm not only referring to the Minister of Economy, which said, I asked about this, that what do you think about this 100,000 Armenians coming from Russia? He said, very good, because we are sure most of them will vote for us, that is for the Civil Contract Party. Okay. So, but he said
65%.
Yeah. And then he said, for the other 30, 40,000, we will send them to training camps to combat duty for 1 or 2 months. If that's true, how they're going to find out who's voting for whom? And if they find out, basically they are admitting that they are doing political persecution against people by applying on them a punishment that is not prescribed by law. That is an exile, military exile. That's how we can call it. Yes. And then, okay, this is a minister of economy. Let's put him aside. The deputy of the chief of staff of prime minister, Daron Chahoyan. It is a lot of time have been attributed with the PR campaign managing for the prime minister. He said the same thing yesterday or 2 days ago already. Yeah, I mean, make a citation with the quote him saying, "I've been asked and I've seen this whole, this noise about should they be sent to training camps? Of course they should be. If they're taking bribes and coming from Russia to vote here, they also should respect their responsibilities and serve in the army. And yes, they will be sent for a 25-day combat duty." Can you think about this again? People put aside the presumption of innocence. There's no such thing anymore. If they're coming from Russian groups, so they took some bribes. It's not that it's more convenient to come in groups, maybe. Okay, so we have a best law enforcement that can wiretap anyone everywhere, but we can't really find if they took any bribe or not. So we left only one thing. I'm making this sarcastic, of course, yeah. So they're not left with any other option but to apply unconventional extrajudicial punishment that is okay, exile them to military duty.
Yeah.
This is what's happening. This is what they are admitting, literally.
Well, if we're going to use a little bit of sarcasm, I'm expecting Armenia to have an army of 100,000. Which means that Pashinyan is going to apologize and beg Aliyev not to take that offensively.
In seriousness, this is a very troubling development and a discussion, but at the same time, very interesting and important to elucidate. I hope that those in the, if you have contacts who are into human rights and journalism about this, you can share Rafael Ishkhanyan's reports and their ACPR reports.
ACPR's report.
Yeah. Well, the organization that you represent and you co-founded. So we will link those reports in the show notes. Rafael Can, I want to thank you very much for your participation. And we look forward to talking to you in the future again.
Thanks for joining us, Rafael.
It was a pleasure for me. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's
our show, troubling as it is. Episode was recorded on June 4th, 2026, 3 days before elections. We've been talking with Rafael Ishkhanyan. He's a lawyer specializing in human rights, particularly freedom of assembly and expression. He coordinates the monitoring of peaceful assemblies at the Helsinki Committee of Armenia and is a member of the ODIHR panel of experts on freedom of assembly and association. In 2023, together with colleagues, he co-founded the Armenian Center for Political Rights, the ACPR. This is a watchdog organization focusing on detecting, responding to, and preventing political persecution and safeguarding political rights. We'll put all the links in the show notes, podcasts.groong.org/episode number. Look them up. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And this may be our last episode before the election, so I want to repeat our call to please, if you're an Armenian citizen, to go out and vote. And if you know any Armenian citizens, to please go out and to convince them to go and vote and make their voice be heard, regardless of their political leanings. I can't think of a more consequential time for Armenians than these elections. So it's really important that everyone votes. All right, I'm Hakob Grigoryan.
And I'm Asbet Bedrosian. We'll talk to you soon.